So today I made a little bit of a change. I'm going to focus mainly on Egypt. But first, Danielle covered a little bit of Tunisia, so I think we can open it up in the Q&A if we want to add more about Tunisia. But I also realized that in 20 minutes, I can't give both cases like the attention they need. So I'm happy to answer questions afterwards. Hopefully this project is based on my dissertation project. It's under review now with Cambridge, so fingers crossed that I get the contract. And I'm just gonna try to present it in, I don't know if it's gonna be too political sciencey. I'll try not to. So today we'll be talking about political opportunities and strategic choices, the Muslim sisterhoods in Egypt. I have this quick outline. I'm going to start with the research question contribution, the design, the argument, findings, and with conclusions, maybe future research. It's not that important, so we can skip it if I'm out of time. Okay, so as we talked a lot here in the sessions about women and their presence during the Arab Spring, the research was inspired by the images of women, I know it's blurry on the screen, who participated at the forefront of the protests, right? They were very important. We don't really have accurate numbers for how many women participated, but the ratio ranges from 40% to 50%. Like it's a big ratio that happened. And I was really curious. I was still in Israel during the 2011. When the whole revolution happened, and I was very curious about it. Now, I also come from Al-Fahim, so I'm very familiar with the Islamist movement in Al-Fahim, the northern branch of the Al-Fahim. I even, for psychometry, I went to Iqra, which is an organization that was sponsored by the northern branch of the Islamic movement. I got a good score on psychometry. It was 701, I gotta say. But they were the ones who trained, I went through the training through the organization that now is banned in Israel. I think it was 2015 that they banned it. I also went to Al-Ahliya, it's a private high school that was also initially sponsored by the northern branch of the Islamic movement. It's a private high school. So I was very familiar with the Islamic movement, but I thought that studying them would be a little bit too close to home. So I decided to look at the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. My main focus was on agency of women. Why do these women really participate in these events? And then, at first glance, they're promoting policies that go against what they're doing, right? So women should stay at home, they should follow certain conservative values. And that kind of brought up the question of how organizing also could affect and shape their views of who they are and how they organize and their perception of what women's rights are, right? So again, you see more conservative women, that's the big day in Egypt. Now, the literature might be a bit boring for people who are not political scientists or social movement scholars. It's about political opportunity structure. The literature has been critiqued a lot, and now we're talking about more strategic interaction, and I'm trying to adopt something that is strategic interaction, still taking account the structure and agency at the same time as interchangeable, and the way I'm trying to do it is in terms of alliances rather than fixed and set structures. And then I'm looking at how women influence that structure and how the structure influences women. So for me, it goes both ways, not one way or the other. I just find it too clean to describe reality, to just assume that it goes one direction over the other. The contribution, so I'm trying to speak to different bodies of literature. One of them is the gendered literature on political opportunity structure. A lot of it focused on, we have a lot of work on Latin America. Now more work is emerging on the Middle East, especially after, the Arab uprising, but less focused on Islamists, and especially the Muslim sisterhood. And the other part that I'm trying to contribute is social movement literatures in general, Islamist movement literature in general, and also to center Islamist women in the debates of the Middle East beyond just repressive Islamists, the Muslim Brotherhood, and complicate who they are and their lives. And part of it is because I'm selfish. I really wanted to understand what's happening. How do they view themselves when they are enacting feminism, right? Feminist consciousness when they're participating and engaging in their activism. So I like to start with this quote. I did conduct some interviews, and I'll talk a little bit more about who I interviewed. From Anwar al-Baltagi, I interviewed him in Turkey. He's a fascinating case. His dad was actually sentenced for execution last year, so he's going to be executed at some point in Egypt. His sister Asma, she was killed during Rab'a's demonstration. She was really young. I think she was like just a teenager. I can't remember how old she was. So his family story is very complicated and entangled with the Muslim Brotherhood and Egyptian history in a lot of ways. But his sister is the fascinating thing is that his sister was very, very vocal and active, and she died for the purpose of promoting her political agenda, yet still she was conservative in what we define as conservative. So when I talked to him, this quote stood out to me, where he said, now Muslim Brotherhood women are participating in more than a half of their activities, in half of their activities referring to the movement. If there is a revival of the movement or a new brotherhood, women will have to be at the heart of it, much more than before. And actually, you notice that that's happening, and there are a few patterns that I will talk about in their organizing. I know everyone assumes that they're dead in Egypt. They went underground because of all the repression and backlash, but they are active in Turkey, in the UK, in the US. I know somebody who moved to New Zealand as well. So they're all over the place with different views, of course, and they have different strategies to engage in kind of the discourse and politics in Egypt without having to be present in person. So why Egypt? I thought Egypt was a very fascinating case, okay? You have a short period of time, a lot has happened. You had first Mubarak, then you had the revolutionary period, then we had the election, and then afterwards we had the coup, which some of my Egyptian friends will argue with me about it, right? Because they view it as a revolution, and women would say, we were on the ground and we didn't want the Muslim Brotherhood, okay? So I am going to respect their view as well, because for me, theoretically, it was a coup. For them, that was a legitimate protest, right? I can't deny their fears. So within a short period of time, a lot has happened, and women were engaged at every level, right? And politically, they moved from just being at the home, engaged in social media, to being actively on the ground. You who are familiar with the protests in Egypt know Asma Mahfouz and how she started the whole thing, posting videos on YouTube, and she was shaming men. She said, I am the woman going to be on the ground and I'm not afraid. Shame on you if you don't come, right? And there's a whole gendered aspect of the whole video and the language that she used, like protectionist and shaming, masculinity, perceptions of masculinity and femininity that goes just in reviewing the transcript of the clip. Why the Muslim sisters? Everyone I talk to, every scholar of Muslim Brotherhood, if you talk to Al-Anani, I don't know if you're familiar with his work, he'll always say, oh, they're just a branch, that nobody takes them seriously. Now, I think there's more work emerging from, what's her name? I can't remember her name, Begani. She's somewhere in Ireland that is writing a little bit more about the Muslim sisterhood. There are no books about the Muslim sisterhood. That was the selling point for mine. And these women are just viewed as followers, right? They're not agents. I know Saba Mahmoud wrote the book about the mosque movement, but it was mainly within the mosque environment, not the political engagement with the political party and the movement as well. Women historically have played a crucial role in supporting the movement from the days it was founded in 1924 or 24 or 5, depends on the records in the 20s. Zainab al-Ghazali is a well-known name. Zainab had her own feminist organization. She comes from the feminist movement, the secular feminist movement. And she ended up consulting with El-Banna, who asked her to come and start the branch and lead it. She decided not to. She wanted to be independent for a little bit. And she became a very crucial figure in the 50s, right, after the backlash against the Muslim Brotherhood. So they were very active from the beginning. Not to say that they didn't exist and that's something new that happened out of the sudden just because of a revolutionary moment. Just depends on our level of analysis and what we're looking at, right? However, they became more and more visible, of course, after the elections because of the Freedom and Justice Party, where we had what's her name? Dina Zakaria, who was also part of the Muslim Brotherhood, and I'll talk a little bit about the interviews that I had. This is during Rab'a, and you see here more backlash against women who were wearing white. White is also, we can talk about symbolism and the flower. But one of the things that women were pointing out that after Rab'a, that marked a point where the state changed its relationship to women. Now the state, instead of viewing women as a red line, khat ahmar, which means that you don't touch women if you want to prevent them from participating, you go and pressure the men, and the men will force their women to go in, right? They don't go target them actively, because the state is the protector of women. It's about state feminism, creating bodies that are worthy of protection. And then now you see women in Rab'a that like brings the state discourse against its own, because the people that they viewed as their like worthy of their protection are now protesting against them. That's when 800 people were killed. That's when Asma was killed, Ammar's sister. And that's when the state started actually jailing women, sexual harassment, interrogation, disappearance. And that would say that was marked a very like a changed relationship to women and women's bodies, and how the state actually responds to their activism. I interviewed about 20 people, and that's a small number if you talk to political scientists, but it was very hard to get them to talk, right? I had to go through someone in the UK to get to somebody in Turkey who introduced me to somebody who introduced me to like multiple people. So it was like a game that in order for me to find these people and ask and gain their trust. And the way I gained their trust is I told them from where I was from, and I told them that the northern branch of the Islamic movement was from my hometown. I mean, I did use my positionality right there to address that. I did also rely on a lot of social media posts, especially with an organization called Women's Against the Coup, which the founders are women who were involved in the Muslim Brotherhood. Lots of news articles and reports. While analyzing all of that, I looked at two things. Medium of organizing, so where did they choose to organize? Civil society versus government structures. Framing, how did they use, what language did they use to promote the movement, right? So what issues also did they focus on? We have women's rights, human rights, a lot of references to international agreements, and a lot of reference to Sharia and Quran, right? Even when they're interpreting women's rights. The way I'm creating it like a strategic interaction game with three main players. We have the secular liberal political parties, so you think of Wafd as one example. Islamists, mainly the MB. You can talk about Salafi, but they're not, they were still marginal even when they were in the government. The military is the biggest part, it's the anchor, right? You can't really win anything without the support of the military. And we can have a whole lecture about the military structure in Egypt, the military, like privatization, how much of the economy they own, the power that they have, and the reason why they didn't take a position against Mubarak, right? There's a lot to assess there with military dynamics, the differences between Tunisia and Syria and all of that. But there's a whole economic aspect there. They weren't happy with Mubarak because his son Jamal Abdel Nasser was being primed, and that was threatening the military's hold over the economy. So there's the whole level of civil-military relations there that we can talk about. And the medium, civil society and government. Civil society is very, very important to shed light on Islamist women and how they organize. Because if you don't look at this level, they're not visible, right? But their work was very, very important in that. Even the da'wah was very important for what happened during the elections. Because the Muslim Brotherhood didn't come out of nowhere, right? The support for them didn't come out of nowhere. So for me, it's a game of alliances. What happened before the revolution, we had like secular and military alliances. Even though with repression, we see at the civil society level, it's different. Then there was a rupture. Then we saw Islamists and military. And now what some Egyptians will call a revolution, there was a rift between secular and Islamists, and that created another opportunity for shift in alliances and shift in structures. So that's kind of in general the theoretical framework I'm working with. So we had Hosni Mubarak, Muhammad Mursi, and then Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. And I have the dates. I restricted the dates because that's when I got the interviews. I don't have, I could get more data, but that's when I actually collected the majority of the interviews that I have. I did check in with a few of them afterwards too. It seems like a lot of it's still standing as is. So the alliance here is between the first period during Hosni Mubarak. It's between the military and secular liberal parties. There was a huge backlash against the MB, but of course it's more complicated than that. There is backlash opening. You can allow them to run as independent candidates, but not as a party. So there was here room for women to kind of get involved. However, at the same time, the state was doing a lot. We had the quotas being introduced in 2009. And lots of literature on quotas could problematize them as well. Because the party put in women, who are the women that are being included? Women who were close to the ruling party, right? The Mubarak's regime. Personal status laws, there was a huge debate. And I know, Daniel, you mentioned personal status law. It's important to highlight that with personal status laws, that's where the government is always constantly negotiating with Muslims and Islamists, right? With even though I heard Sisi now is like confronting with Sheikh al-Azhar, but religious institutions have a big say in what happens in personal status law. And there's this whole competition between the state and those Islamist groups over who really represents Islam, right? Let's not forget that the second article of the Egyptian constitution, before Islamists came to play, was Sharia, was like emphasizing Sharia as an important element of legislations in Egypt. So it didn't come out of nowhere, right? Islamists did not invent that. It was there the whole time. There's always this competition between Islamists and the state over who really represents what true Islam is and who's the protector of vulnerable groups like women and all that. And that's what brings women in the center of the debate. CEDAW, Egypt ratified CEDAW, but of course they put reservation on Article 2, which is the implementation. So even if you ratify CEDAW, that doesn't mean that you are pro-women's rights. National machinery, actually they're still active right now in Egypt. I think it was the National Women, can't remember the full title. They're still active in Egypt. And that's when the sisters first were more engaged in civil society, starting with dawah, mosques, lots in the periphery, right? And these are the people who came out and voted for the Muslim Brotherhood during the elections. They focused on preaching and social work, lots of charity work. Where the state failed, they provided services for people. They had access to women's circles, and that brought them a lot of power. Some women ran for election in 2000, 2005, and 2010. This is around the time the quotas were introduced. These women didn't really win much, but also had a backlash from the state. Like Idiri, for instance, her husband was arrested, and that was a message for her to quit, but she didn't. A lot of focus on education in their platforms. These women who ran for office, they didn't talk about women's rights, they didn't talk about freedom and like democratic rights at that time, because of the political structure, of course. This is from Mukarram Idiri's platform. She said, education will always be my main interest. We want educational reforms on an Islamic basis. The government wants teaching to be a mechanistic job, not to be carried out by people with their own ideas and convictions. So that's kind of an interesting focus on that. Her whole platform and campaign was focused on that. Then we have the next stage where Muhammad Morsi, again, there's the revolution, I'm skipping through it really quickly, and then Muhammad Morsi, that's when the Freedom and Justice Party included more women, right? The Brotherhood was really, really pressured to include women because internationally everyone was freaking out, right, about the Muslim Brotherhood. Domestically, they had to negotiate with seculars and liberal parties. They wanted to reassure Egyptians, so women's rights, again, re-emerge as an important debate, a point of debate there. So we see that there's an opening for all groups. The FGP was founded. There was an international pressure, and that's when we see the sisterhood. Some of them stayed in civil society, but others moved on to the party. And the Muslim Brotherhood specifically told everyone, if you're involved with the movement, you're not involved with the party. If you're involved with the party, you're not involved in the movement. They wanted to create some sort of separation because of the backlash that they're anticipating. The initial framing was the slogan of the revolution, حرية عدالة اجتماعية, like they used the same language, right? كلمة حرية عدالة اجتماعية. Then in later debates, women's rights became major thing. Again, I'm looking at the international, domestic as well. There's the whole negotiations because they're catering to a certain audience, right? It's not only domestic, it's also international. It's the US, it's Western countries, it's the UN, the way they're talking to. So we can't really just look at the domestic level without examining geopolitics. As Nicola.
More minutes.
What, money?
A few more minutes.
Oh, okay. I don't know. I will be fast. So this is kind of Sabah Sakari say, in my platform, I pay special attention to women and youth, whom I believe should give the chance to occupy the highest position in the party. Women in particular are very important since the progress of any society is closely related to them. So, big shift. Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, sorry, I'm running through the stuff. You see that's a different sort of alliance. We have a backlash. More than 50,000 Muslim Brotherhood are imprisoned, men and women, but mainly men. The whole organization is like collapsing because there is nobody to take over. And that's when you see women stepping in. they created their own organization, Women Against the Coup, with a focus on women's rights, right? With a focus on states' abuse against women's rights. So they're like, Sisi, you're pretending to be a protector of women, yet you are raping women, yet you are imprisoning women. Women are no longer a red line, so they're using the state's discourse against them, against like the state itself. And we see a lot of them now in civil society organizations abroad in Egypt, like even Huda Abdel Munaim, who I interviewed via WhatsApp in Egypt. She got arrested and now she's not very active. There was a rift in the Muslim Brotherhood, a separation, a whole tense between the old guards and the new guards, the ones that wanted, they were very upset with the Muslim Brotherhood for working with the military, and the other ones who wanted more collaboration. So that also was reflected in the women's movement. And we see actually women being included on very structural things in the Muslim Brotherhood in Turkey and in the UK, even though in Egypt it's still kind of not fully there because they're worried about backlash. And I think you said a few minutes, right? Maybe I'll just show this quote. So this is a quote mainly showing how they mobilized human rights. This is a statement. It says, Monday, December 15, 2014, marks the anniversary of the cabinet building clashes where security apparatuses committed many violations against girls and women of Egypt. So you say they're focused on how the security state is now treating women's bodies and trying to use that against the state. So again, emphasis on the sniper, terrorize and kill girls, and shamefully arrested girls and women, all of which are heinous crimes we are still suffering now. And that's from the Revolutionary Coalition for Egyptian Women, founded by Muslim Brotherhood women. So in conclusion, this is how it would look like if I had more time, but I think I will pause and I'm happy to answer any questions in the Q&A.
We'll answer the questions after all our talks.
Okay.